Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 6 running back rankings for the 2023 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, we have a lot of topics to cover. Of course, besides talking about my top 36 ranked running backs, sharing with you guys my thought process and opinions on each individual player, while also presenting statistics in order to justify their current rankings, we'll also talk about running back matchups, talking about which defenses thus far this season on average have been allowing the most fantasy points to opposing running backs in order to identify the most advantageous matchups going into the given week. We're also going to be giving you guys a little bit of an update in regards to the overall waiver wire priority. There has been relevant information regarding Justin Jefferson and James Conner both going to the injured reserve. So I wanted to go ahead and give you guys flex rankings in terms of priority, in terms of waiver wire going into week 6, because I truly think that is valuable. Before we get into all of that, a reminder, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season with the singular purpose of trying to help you guys win a fantasy football championship. So if you have yet to do so, be sure to subscribe. We are very close to achieving our goal of 80,000 subscribers. Thank you very much for all the support. So to go ahead and begin, let's talk about some waiver wire adjustments. As you guys can see on screen, we have flex rankings for waiver wire. I'm going to go ahead and also present 7 through 12, but at this current moment in time, I still do believe Roschon Johnson is number 1, primarily because we do expect to see Khalil Herbert miss at least 3 to 4 weeks. KJ Osborne gets a huge bump considering the vacated target, opportunities of Justin Jefferson that will no longer be within this offense for the next 4 weeks minimum. Logan Thomas is our number 3, primarily because anytime you have an opportunity of getting a consistent tight end for the remainder of the season, I absolutely believe that we should take advantage of said opportunity. Tyjae Spears, besides the fact that he has, handcuff upside with Derrick Henry, he also has the option of being a flex option, considering in 3 out of the last 4 games he has played, he has been a top 36 ranked running back. My number 5 is Emari Demercado, primarily because he will be relevant for the next 4 weeks, after which, once James Conner returns, he won't be as much in the rotation, but considering they do still have Keontae Ingram, and they just signed Tony Jones Jr., I do expect Emari Demercado to still be the primary RB1 of this team going forward, but still a little bit of a lesser option in comparison to those 4 other players. I guess it just depends on what your priority is in terms of how badly you need a running back for the next 4 weeks. Perhaps you just lost James Conner, and I guess Emari Demercado would be the best overall play going forward for your specific circumstance. Number 6 is Josh Reynolds. I didn't want to mention guys like Joshua Palmer and or Elijah Moore, like I mentioned in yesterday's waiver wire video, because they're both already rostered in 50+% of leagues. So their expectation is that they're not available within your leagues. Just wanted to mention them yesterday for that specific reason, just in case someone dropped them because of their bye weeks. We go on to 7 through 12. Again, very familiar names from yesterday. Even a kicker in this conversation, but Jeff Wilson Jr. moves up to number 10, primarily because Devon Etienne is going to probably miss the next 1 to 2 weeks at minimum, considering the knee injury that he sustained. Hopefully that is not going to linger for the remainder of the season, but Jeff Wilson Jr. has been designated to return off the injured reserve, and obviously will be helping Raheem Mostert for the remainder of the next coming weeks until Devon Achane's return. Okay, with that all covered, let's go ahead and now transition into talking about some running back matchups going into the given week. As you guys can see on screen, we have each team designated by a rank. The number 1 ranked team, the Denver Broncos, allowed the most fantasy points to opposing running backs thus far this season on average in terms of rushing statistics isolated. The reason why I isolate rushing statistics is because a matchup in itself does not increase the potential of a running back getting more utilization in the receiving game. That primarily has to do with the offensive coordinator, the quarterback, and the volume of routes that specific running back runs within a given week. Therefore, we isolate running back rushing statistics, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns. The Broncos, Panthers, Giants, the easiest matchups at the position. And even though the Green Bay Packers and the Pittsburgh Steelers are in the top 6 of that conversation, unfortunately, we will not have the privilege of taking on those overall matchups, primarily because they're on bye week. Do not forget, we will not have the services of players like Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, Jalen Warren, and Najee Harris. Keeps that in mind. But either way, these are the most advantageous matchups going into the given week. Besides the Broncos allowing 6.22 yards per carry on average, the Cincinnati Bengals are also allowing 5.01 yards per carry, even though they're a little bit lower. The Seattle Seahawks only allowing 2.6 yards per carry. Keep that in mind, despite the fact they've given up a fair share of rushing touchdowns. In terms of yardage, really haven't given up much thus far this season. Now, speaking of not giving up very much in terms of running back rushing statistics, the Philadelphia Eagles, the New Orleans Saints, the Cleveland Browns, San Francisco 49ers, these are teams that have been absolutely incredible thus far this season on average. Again, in terms of the yards per carry on average allowed to these opposing running backs, 3.06 is ridiculous. That's certainly going to be tough for someone like Breece Hall. Of course, other teams like the Detroit Lions, Jacksonville Jaguars, they have played very well in terms of stopping the run thus far this season as well. But either way, just wanted to give you some representation as to the most advantageous and disadvantageous matchups going into the given week. I'll once again refer back to these statistics, but let's go ahead and let's transition into talking about my top 36 running back rankings. Again, for those of you who are trying to stay up to date on my latest rankings, whether it is these videos or the live streams that I conduct here on the channel, be sure to go ahead and travel down to the description. Either check out my Patreon or be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get a first-time deposit match up to $500. Again, that offer is not going to last for long, so be sure to take advantage of the opportunity. You're also going to get my rankings sent from me directly to your email every single Sunday for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense, by tier, top 120 flex, half PPR, full PPR. Rankings that are never offered on this channel, available to you, all encompassing every single Sunday morning, so that regardless of what you're doing on Sunday mornings, you have an advantage upon your league mates. For those of you who are wondering if you're eligible of helping me help you for the remainder of the season, be sure to check out the map to the right side of the screen. Of course, draft responsibly or put together some pick'ems via Underdog Fantasy and follow what I've been doing as of late. In the last couple days, I've caught fire, and hopefully we're going to make this a habit rather than just an occasional, appearance of having ourselves consistent back-to-back upside plays in which we're going ahead and finding success via these overall pick'em slips. But last night obviously went well. Sunday obviously went well, and we're going to continue into Thursday. I'll present those overall pick'em suggestions on the Thursday video, quarterback and tight end ranking, so keep an eye out for that. But also go ahead, put together some pick'em slips yourself via Underdog Fantasy and take advantage of the opportunity. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about my top 36 running back rankings for week 6. A reminder, if you guys are looking for a specific player, there are timestamps down in the description of the video. Outside of that, let's go ahead and begin with our number 1. We have Christian McCaffrey. Again, Christian McCaffrey should always be the number 1, even though he had an underwhelming performance in week 5 against the Dallas Cowboys, despite the fact that their team put up 42 total points. It was just a George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk game. I mean, they scored 4 of the overall total touchdowns for that offense. And even though Christian McCaffrey was able to extend his streak of 14 consecutive games with a touchdown, whether it's regular season or playoffs, with the San Francisco 49ers, the fact of the matter is, there was a chance for Christian McCaffrey to have himself a second rushing touchdown in that game. Unfortunately, fumbled on the 2-yard line just before the goal line, but it is what it is. Going forward, Christian McCaffrey will be able to put up incredible performances, and despite the fact that they have a difficult matchup with a team that is coming off of a bye week, regardless of how great the Cleveland Browns have been in terms of stopping the run thus far this season, Christian McCaffrey can get it done through the air, and he'll continue to do so every single week. I mean, in 10 of the last 14 games he has played, he has surpassed 100 total yards. Not all of that is on the ground. A lot of receiving work that continues to accelerate his overall fantasy upside and his contributions to our fantasy teams. Moving on to our number 2, we have Austin Ekeler. Earlier today, we got confirmation from himself. He's thinking he's back. A little bit of a John Wick quote there. But Austin Ekeler did say earlier today in an interview with Matt Harmon that he is expecting 99% to be ready for week 6, which is fantastic. Again, he's been dealing with a little bit of that high ankle sprain, and boy, have we been missing Austin Ekeler. Those last couple weeks that we tried to start Joshua Kelly were disasters, but going forward, Austin Eckler's back, and he's going to be the touchdown monster we know he is, and we love him to be. Again, the last time we saw Austin Ekeler, this guy was putting up 117 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 4 catches, 47 receiving yards, 24.4 fantasy points against the Miami Dolphins defense, averaging 7.31 yards per carry on average against that defense as a whole. But now that he returns to this offense, it's a little bit different than the last time he was here. Unfortunately, Mike Williams, season-ending ACL injury. Last season, we did see a little bit of a stint in which Austin Ekeler played without Mike Williams. In those games without Mike Williams only, in which Keenan Allen was still present. In those 3 games, Austin Ekeler was averaging 7.7 targets per game, 6.0 receptions, 48 receiving yards, and 0.33 receiving touchdowns per game. So basically a receiving touchdown 1 out of every 3 games. Now, when we take that into comparison to when we did see Keenan Allen and Mike Williams both active last season, in games in which Austin Ekeler was active, Austin Ekeler was only averaging 4.6 targets, 4.4 receptions, 31.6 receiving yards, and 0 receiving touchdowns per game. There's going to be an even bigger uptick of overall opportunity for him in the coming weeks without Mike Williams in the lineup. Of course, he's the number 2 going into the given week. Moving on to our number 3, the thumbnail of today's episode, going against the second best matchup at the position. Now, besides the fact that the Carolina Panthers are allowing 22.4 fantasy points per game in terms of running back rushing statistics alone, they're also allowing 5.2 yards per attempt. That's the second best matchup. And going into the given week without De'Von Achane, again, he's dealing with a little bit of a knee injury. Even with the return of Jeff Wilson Jr., there isn't an expectation for Jeff Wilson Jr. to be given a huge workload. So this is going to be Raheem Mostert all day. In the last 2 games in which we've seen Raheem Mostert for this offense without De'Von Achane impeding on his overall opportunity, 12.0 fantasy points against the Los Angeles Chargers. The following week against the New England Patriots, 25.2. I'm expecting a huge high upside game for him. I mean, he's coming off of a week in which he only played 59% of the snaps, and only touched the ball 12 times and still managed to score 14.8 half PPR fantasy points. He has himself incredible upside within an incredible offense going against the best matchup at the position. Moving on to our number 4, we have Travis Etienne. My goodness, Travis Etienne coming off of a monster week. Again, Matt Milano getting injured in that game certainly played a key role, but running the ball consistently against the Bills is the way to beat them. And Travis Etienne putting up 34.4 fantasy points was not an expected outcome in the given week, but he's balling out this season. He has an opportunity this week of taking on the Indianapolis Colts. You go back to week 1. In Indianapolis, they went ahead and they bopped the Colts. They put up a great amount of points. And of course, Travis Etienne, 18 carries, 77 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 5 catches, 27 receiving yards, 18.9 fantasy points in the given matchup against the Colts. Now they get to take them on at home. The Jacksonville Jaguars are 8-0 against the Indianapolis Colts in the last 8 seasons at home. The expectation is an incredible upside game, especially considering the Colts are the 7th best matchup at the position. And the last time he took on the Colts earlier this season, week 1, Tank Bigsby even stole a touchdown. Hopefully we get 2 touchdowns for Travis Etienne in the given week. Moving on to number 5, we have Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs coming off of another double-digit fantasy point week, 17.4 fantasy points. And even though the offensive line is not playing well, the opportunity is there. 25 total touches. This is what we've talked about all season long. Even though Josh Jacobs has been underwhelming, he is eventually going to get those touchdowns, and it's going to alleviate everything. And going forward against the New England Patriots, there is an expectation where running the ball will be early and often, primarily because the New England Patriots have been awful. In the last 2 games, the New England Patriots have been outscored 18-72. They've only put up 18 points as an offense, and they've given up 72 points as a defense. Unbelievable. I mean, a lot of those points have been, Mac Jones throwing pick sixes or, defensive touchdowns. But nonetheless, there is an expectation in which Josh Jacobs is going to be running the ball a lot with a positive game script. And of course, this team is going to find success last season against the New England Patriots. Week 15, 20 attempts for 93 rushing yards, 12 fantasy points. If he's able to continue to get that kind of a workload of opportunity against this New England Patriots defense, which is dealing with a lot of injuries, of course, we're expecting a huge week from Josh Jacobs. Number 6, we have Tony Pollard. It is very unfortunate just how underwhelming the Dallas Cowboys offense has been in recent weeks. Of course, besides the fact that they cannot score touchdowns in the red zone, Tony Pollard hasn't scored a touchdown since week 1. And again, I'm expecting Tony Pollard to score a boatload of touchdowns this year. So it's only a matter of time. This upcoming week, taking on the Los Angeles Chargers, it is a very advantageous matchup. Specifically, thus far this season, they gave up 23.9 fantasy points to Josh Jacobs, 15 fantasy points to Alexander Mattison, 17 to Derrick Henry, and 12 to Raheem Mostert. The expectation is not only double-digit fantasy points, but hopefully an upside week in which Tony Pollard can not only find the end zone once, but hopefully twice, as he's getting himself far more utilization within the receiving game going forward. Moving on to our number 7, we have Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson luckily was able to find himself a touchdown in the matchup last weekend, but again, taking on the Houston Texans, we expected far more rushing upside. 14 carries for 46 rushing yards in an advantageous matchup wasn't really what we were expecting out of Bijan Robinson, but luckily was able to get himself a consistent volume of work in the receiving game. But going into this upcoming weekend's matchup against the Washington Commanders, again, there is an expectation for even more upside in the rushing category. Specifically, in the last 3 games, the Washington Commanders have allowed 121, 70, and 128 rushing yards to opposing running backs in those 3 games. So as long as we have Desmond Ridder at home, who again, in his entire career has never lost a home game, whether it's in college or within the pros, there is an expectation for potentially a positive game script against the Washington Commanders and a lot of rushing for Bijan Robinson. Moving on to our number 8, we have Alvin Kamara. My goodness, Alvin Kamara has been fantastic. Not only this season, which he's been given a huge workload of opportunity, coming off of a game in which he had 17.2 fantasy points, 22 rushing attempts, 80 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 3 catches on 3 targets, 17 receiving yards. On top of the fact that Alvin Kamara had his last touch of the game with 14 minutes and 28 seconds left in the 4th quarter. He didn't even play the entirety of the 4th quarter and still had himself 17 fantasy points. This upcoming week, they take on Houston. Again, it is the 8th best matchup at the position. They're allowing 15.34 fantasy points per game in terms of running back rushing statistics alone, not to mention all the work that Alvin Kamara is going to be able to do through the air. There is an expectation for a huge upside game. In the last 6 games that Alvin Kamara has played to this season, in the last 4 games of the 2022 year, he has been able to get himself 23 plus touches in 5 of those last 6 games. The expectation is more upside going forward from Alvin Kamara. Moving on to our number 9, we have Kenneth Walker. Obviously, he's coming off of the bye week. The last time we saw him put up, 12 fantasy points against the New York Giants. A little bit of an underwhelming performance. Again, thus far this season, he's averaging 17.4 fantasy points per game. In the last 4 games, he's had a base minimum of 16 touches in each of those games, and he's handling 71% of the Seattle Seahawks running back rushing attempts this season. Of course, with Charles Cross coming back healthy, their starting left tackle. In a week, I think in week 7, we'll also get back their starting right tackle, Abraham Lucas. Everything is trending well, especially this team coming off of a bye week. They will be healthy, and they will have prepared for the upcoming matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals, who are allowing not only 14.32 fantasy points per game in terms of running back rushing statistics, but they're also allowing 5.01 yards per attempt. Again, this is going to be a great game for Kenneth Walker. I'm expecting him, of course, top 10 upside at the position. Moving on to our number 10, we have David Montgomery. Man, David Montgomery has looked fantastic thus far this season. He's coming off of 2 consecutive games of over 100 rushing yards. He has scored a rushing touchdown in all 4 games that he has played at a base minimum. And with Jahmyr Gibbs dealing with a hamstring injury, again, there's an expectation that David Montgomery is not only going to continue to get the bulk load of the overall opportunities, he's going to get the goal line work, he's going to get receiving work, and he's going to be fantasy relevant. That's why he's in this top 10 conversation, despite the fact that he takes on a difficult matchup with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Considering how elite the Detroit Lions offensive line has shown and proven to be, whether it's last season or thus far this season, this offense is going to roll through that defense. I'm expecting a huge game from David Montgomery. Again, we got to remember the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, even though they haven't allowed that many fantasy points per game, they've been allowing 4.9 yards per carry to opposing running backs. We're hoping for upside for David Montgomery. Our number 11 is DeAndre Swift. Thus far this season, in the last 4 games that he has participated in since week 2, he has gotten himself a base minimum of 17 touches per game. In the last 2 games, he's had himself 10 overall receptions. We never thought that DeAndre Swift would immediately come into this offense and get the receiving utilization that he has. Again, the expectation was because of the rushing upside of Jalen Hurts, he wouldn't check it down like he did last season. And fantastic, we'll take all of the overall workload we can get with DeAndre Swift. In the last 4 games, DeAndre Swift at very least has been the RB13 in his last 4 performances. Of course, he's going to continue to be a top 12 option at the position, considering the offenses he is associated with, and of course, the positive game script they're going to see going up against the New York Jets. The Jets are going to have to pass the ball a lot in that given game, which will obviously lead to a lot of rushing for DeAndre Swift in the second half of the overall contest. Moving on to our number 12, Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams has played very well, and even though he had a very difficult matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles in week 5, he was pretty effective overall. 13 rushing attempts for 53 overall rushing yards, had himself a little bit of utilization in terms of his overall receiving game, but primarily is the clear RB1 of this team. And even though he's coming off of an underwhelming performance of 6.7 fantasy points, it's primarily because of the fact that they didn't get themselves more red zone usage. If in fact this team was to at least move the ball more efficiently throughout the game, more red zone upside, more red zone opportunities. Again, you got to remember, thus far this season, Kyren Williams is in the top 5 conversation in terms of red zone rushing attempts within the 5-yard line. So the expectation is if Kyren Williams and this offense is able to run the ball and move the ball effectively against the Arizona Cardinals, he will find the end zone. It's the 9th best matchup at the running back position, so we're expecting him to take advantage of the opportunity. Last year, as the Rams took on the Arizona Cardinals, in both games, a running back scored a touchdown. Hopefully this week, Kyren Williams will continue that trend going into week 6. All right, our number 13 is Isiah Pacheco. Closing out the C tier, Isiah Pacheco has been unbelievable. Each of the last 3 games scoring himself a rushing touchdown. Now has the opportunity of taking on the easiest matchup at the position. Again, besides the fact that the Denver Broncos are allowing all of the points to opposing running backs and allowing over 6 yards per carry, just giving you some representation as to the performances they have given up. Breece Hall had 177 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Raheem Mostert, 82 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. Devon Achane, 203 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Khalil Herbert had 103 rushing yards. Bijan Robinson, 87 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. I'm expecting upside on top of the fact that in the last 3 consecutive games, besides scoring a touchdown, Isiah Pacheco has had himself 17 touches minimum. The expectation is an incredible game within the matchup. Moving on to our number 14, James Cook. James Cook's performance was the most disappointing running back performance of the season since Josh Jacobs was taking on the Buffalo Bills, which was a negative yard performance. Unfortunately, James Cook came away with this game with 5 rushing attempts for -4 rushing yards. Like we all watched the game on Sunday morning during the live stream that I was conducting here on the channel, again, the game script pretty much got away from them. They were down early. They ditched the running game. And because of that, James Cook unfortunately had himself a very underwhelming performance of only 3.6 fantasy points. Going into the given week, taking on the New York Giants of all matchups, one of the most advantageous. Again, they're allowing 5.32 yards per carry and over 21 fantasy points per game to running backs. It's the third best matchup. I'm expecting a huge outpouring of fantasy points from James Cook. Remember, even though he's coming off of a very underwhelming week, the 3 prior performances were 17.9, 12.2, and 14.2. I'm expecting double-digit fantasy points. If you can buy low on James Cook, do it now. Moving on to our number 15, we have Saquon Barkley. I'm not 100% certain if Saquon Barkley is going to be at a full capacity. We know that Daniel Jones is dealing with an injury, neck injury. We know that 3 of the starting offensive linemen for this offense were out last week. We know that they even brought in Lyle Collins to work out for the team earlier today. There is a potential which Saquon Barkley may be put in a situation where he's going to be limited coming off of the injury. The offensive line is in shambles. They take on the Buffalo defense. The quarterback may not play in Daniel Jones. They might have Tyrod Taylor under center. Everything could be in a very tricky situation for Saquon Barkley, but hopefully by the time we get to Sunday, we'll have more clarity on the factor. If in fact the offensive line is back, Daniel Jones is back, I would expect a better performance than number 15 overall. Moving on to our number 16, we have Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon has a plague. What the plague is not being able to score touchdowns despite having an incredible volume of goal line opportunity. And I don't just blame him. I blame his offensive line a lot. Even going back to last season, this is a reoccurring theme. 2 consecutive seasons in which he is given red zone goal line opportunity and he is not able to punch it in. Specifically, thus far this season, he is number 6 amongst all rushing options in terms of rushing attempts inside the 10-yard line. He is number 4 amongst all rushing options in terms of rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line. Yet he has only 1 rushing touchdown to his entire season. There is going to be positive regression in the coming weeks. I'm anticipating Joe Mixon to score touchdowns. Based on the fact that Joe Burrow's healthy, the offense looks like they're finally back, and with them scoring more often, Joe Mixon will be given more opportunity. Man, he just needs the offensive line to give him a little push and get into the end zone on these overall opportunities. Moving on to our number 17, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, again, the overall opportunities he was given was fine, just wasn't able to find the end zone. Unfortunately, Tyjae Spears did so, and that really did overall kind of shift the balance of this backfield in the direction of Tyjae Spears. But ultimately, we have to understand that Spears is going to continue to get himself 8 to 10 touches every single week. He's going to have the opportunity of stealing a touchdown. The only problem with Derrick Henry has pretty much been that he has been consistently inconsistent. And I guess that's consistency to an extent, but man, Derrick Henry, please wake up and be more consistent. Score touchdowns. This offense is just so lackluster at times. It truly is an unfortunate sight to see. They do take on the Baltimore Ravens. It is a very difficult matchup. They're only allowing 3.83 yards per carry on average. Nonetheless, Derrick Henry still a relevant option at the position. Our number 18 for this week is Alexander Mattison. Again, the expectation is that due to the absence of Justin Jefferson, there will be more opportunity for a running back like Alexander Mattison to get a higher overall usage of workload, especially taking on the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears are an advantageous matchup. In the last couple games this season, they gave up 82 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown to Green Bay running backs, 92 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown to Tampa Bay running backs, 126 and 2 rushing touchdowns to Kansas City running backs, and of course, 84 rushing yards to Denver Broncos running backs. There is an expectation for Alexander Mattison to hopefully continue this double-digit streak of fantasy point upside within the given games. Obviously, Cam Akers is getting himself more utilization within this offense, but it's not impeding Alexander Mattison enough to make him outside of the top 18 conversation. Now, before I get into talking about the remaining running backs on today's episode, a reminder for those of you guys who haven't checked out the 1.01 brand, be sure to check out AndrewKirchhoffShop.com. Link down in the description. It's the official merchandise line of the Andrew Kirchhoff YouTube channel. So for those of you who are trying to show support to the channel, rep the 1.01 brand, and greetings and salutations. Be sure to do so today. Thank you very much for all the support. Again, thanks to all the support that you guys have shown via the merch thus far this season. We are glad to announce, of course, once again, that shipping is free for the remainder of the year, so be sure to take advantage of the opportunity. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about our number 19, Brian Robinson Jr. Brian Robinson's coming off of a game in which he had 6 attempts for 10 rushing yards. Again, game script is going to do that to some running backs, just like it did to James Cook earlier in the week. But we can't ignore the fact that Brian Robinson's been a good running back this season. Specifically, in the first half of the game, the Washington Commanders were 9 for 13 passing in the first half. In the second half, they were 28 of 38 passing. They completely abandoned the running game, and notably so. They were down a lot of points, and they were trying to make a comeback against the Chicago Bears. Going into the given matchup against the Atlanta Falcons this week, again, even though it is not the most advantageous matchup, we have seen Brian Robinson take on this defense last season. 18 carries for 105, 19.5 fantasy points. The hope is that the Atlanta Falcons and the Washington Commanders can keep it close, because if in fact they do, Brian Robinson, Bijan Robinson will be running the ball consistently and finding themselves a lot of success. Moving on to our number 20, we have Rhamondre Stevenson. I want to hope that this offense and that this coaching staff can finally figure out what they're doing wrong and fix it. Because the fact that this offense has scored 18 points in the last 2 weeks, while the fact that they have given up 72 points as a team, outscored 18-72, they have been out of games outright. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, even Mac Jones is getting replaced late in games. And so is Rhamondre Stevenson. They're letting, guys like Ezekiel Elliott run the ball in the second half. Hopefully, Rhamondre Stevenson is no longer dealing with a thigh injury. And hopefully, this offense is going to wake up. Because last year, against this defense in the Las Vegas Raiders, we saw Rhamondre Stevenson have 19 carries for 172 and a rushing touchdown for 23 fantasy points. The hope is that, of course, Rhamondre Stevenson will get back on track. But the fact that this offense is worse with Bill O'Brien in comparison to Matt Patricia as their offense coordinator is absurd to me. Rhamondre, please wake up. Figure it out, offense. Bill Belichick, fix what is going on, please. Moving on to our number 21, we have Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce has been incredible. In the last 4 games, 17 touches minimum. He has had 108 and 82 rushing yards in each of the last 2 games. Fantastic numbers. The unfortunate reality of the situation is that he takes on the Saints that are only allowing 6.22 fantasy points per game and 3.46 yards per carry to opposing running backs. The second most difficult matchup at the position. Even that being the case, when I went and take a deeper look at the New Orleans Saints, in the last 7 games, they have not allowed a singular running back against them to go over 70 rushing yards. The expectation is that Dameon Pierce will be bottled up, but considering the volume of opportunity he is given, he's not going to be shy of potentially scoring a touchdown and saving his week. Moving on to our number 22. Even though, look at these rushing yards. My goodness, the overall next-gen kind of distribution of his overall rushing opportunity, all positive with those green rushing attempts. Even though that was the case, they took on the best matchup at the position. Now they take on the most difficult matchup, taking on the Philadelphia Eagles, which are only allowing 3.06 yards per carry to opposing running backs and 5.98 fantasy points in terms of running back rushing statistics. The expectation is that, yes, Breece Hall will continue to be a huge part of this offense considering he's no longer limited, but I'm expecting a negative game script in which the Philadelphia Eagles mount an early lead and force the New York Jets to throw the ball for majority of the second half, which will not bode well for Breece Hall's overall potential within the given week. Moving on to our number 23 and number 24, we have Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss. Zach Moss said, hey, you know what? Hold my beer. You went ahead and you signed a 3-year extension for multiple millions of dollars, but I'm going to go ahead and prove to everyone that I'm still kind of the lead back of this offense. And my goodness, he dominated. Now, even though going forward, Jonathan Taylor is not going to be limited and Zach Moss will not be the lead back of this offense, he has still earned himself opportunities within this backfield. And especially considering Anthony Richardson is going to be out, those overall rushing attempts are gone. And those rushing attempts are now going to go in the direction of Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor. The only question is Jonathan Taylor going to still be limited going into the given week? It is a difficult matchup against Jacksonville. Again, this team has been 0-8 in the last 8 games in Jacksonville. So there is an expectation of a little bit of a difficulty, a little bit of a hiccup. But ultimately, as long as Jonathan Taylor is no longer limited, he is going to be the higher ranked running back and far greater than number 23. We just don't have official word on the matter. So I'll go ahead and rank them back to back in the RB2 conversation as of this current moment in time. Specifically in the last 2 games in which we have seen, or specifically in the last 3 games in which we have seen Anthony Richardson missing or left the game early with an injury. In those 3 games, Zach Moss, 18.7 fantasy points, 21.5 fantasy points, and 32.5 fantasy points. They're going to run the ball a lot considering how well this offensive line is played. So expect both these guys to be relevant. Moving on to our number 25, Jaleel McLaughlin. The expectation is that considering that this team did not play Javonte Williams on Sunday, going into the Thursday game, that he may not play. And even if he does play, he may be limited. Jaleel McLaughlin, under the assumption that Javonte Williams is not active, is my number 25 overall running back. Coming off of consecutive weeks of scoring a touchdown, he is the only running back on this team that has scored a touchdown this season and is continuing to be that goal line upside player. 2 receiving touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, had the only running back rushing goal line attempt thus far this season. The expectation going up against the Kansas City Chiefs is upside in the receiving game based on a negative game script. And if that's going to be the case, Jaleel McLaughlin as a receiving back in this offense should be relevant. Moving on to our number 26, we have Emari Demercado taking over for James Conner. Again, James Conner is going to be hitting the injured reserve. And in his absence, of course, Emari Demercado should get all of the overall utilization. In the game in which he played last week, playing 77% of the snaps against the Cincinnati Bengals, running for 4.5 yards per carry, scoring a rushing touchdown, scoring 12.2 fantasy points, the expectation is that he should continue to be relevant within this offense. In the last 4 games in which James Conner has played fully, weeks 1 through 4, he was given 12, 16, 23, and 19 opportunities. I'm expecting Emari Demercado to see himself a lot of opportunity within the given matchup, especially considering Keontae Ingram is still dealing with a neck injury, and Tony Jones Jr. was brought in to pretty much be a practice squad guy, or if anything, kind of learn the offense in the next coming weeks. Emari Demercado is the lead back for sure within the given week. Moving on to our number 27, we have Jerome Ford. It is a difficult matchup taking on the San Francisco 49ers, but there is a huge concern as to whether or not Deshaun Watson even plays coming off of the bye week, primarily because they signed PJ Walker, and they've already announced that if in fact Deshaun Watson is not able to play in the given week, PJ Walker would be his replacement. That is very concerning to me. But if in fact Deshaun Watson does play, of course this offense has far more upside. In the last 2 games in which Jerome Ford has played with Deshaun Watson, 18.1 and 22.6 fantasy points. He's gotten himself 2 receptions in each of the last 3 weeks, whether it was with or without a guy like Deshaun Watson under center, which means that this team is going to continue to utilize him as a 3-down back despite the overall contributions of someone like Kareem Hunt. The expectation is a difficult matchup and probably less fantasy points, especially if Deshaun Watson is to miss. Number 28 is Roschon Johnson. Roschon Johnson will be filling in for Khalil Herbert. Again, even though Roschon Johnson is currently in the concussion protocol, the separation between the Thursday night football game against the Washington Commanders and their game this upcoming Sunday against the Minnesota Vikings is 10 to 11 days. In that overall span of time, the expectation is that he will clear concussion protocol, and when in fact he does, he should play well. Considering this offensive line has gotten healthy, they've been able to run the ball with Khalil Herbert in the last 2 games 28 times for 179 rushing yards. The expectation is an upside performance, hopefully, for Roschon Johnson. I'm not guaranteeing touchdowns, but at least opportunity to make him a relevant starting back, whether it is as an RB3 or a flex option. Moving on to our number 29, we have Jahmyr Gibbs. Again, Jahmyr Gibbs, in the last 3 games he's played with Montgomery, 7.0, 9.1, and 7.1. Not incredible performances considering in a half PPR, that's RB 36, 24, and 29. The only game in which he was able to be a relevant running back was without David Montgomery in the lineup, and even then, he was RB23 within the given week. The only reason that DeAndre Swift was able to be a relevant starting back last season was because he scored touchdowns more often than not, even when Jamal Williams was the starting back. From weeks 8 through 18 in the final 11 games of the season, with the Detroit Lions, DeAndre Swift scored 8 touchdowns in those 11 games. Jahmyr Gibbs is still coming back from that injury. He needs to score touchdowns, otherwise he is a difficult start within the given week. Moving on to Rachaad White. He does take on a difficult matchup against the Detroit Lions. Rachaad White has already had multiple difficult matchups already this season, and he has not played well in them thus far. So if in fact he is taking on the Detroit Lions, who have allowed less than 82 rushing yards to opposing running backs in 12 of the last 13 games, going back since week 11 of 2022, and the fact that they've allowed 60 or fewer rushing yards to opposing running backs in 8 of the last 13 games they have played, my goodness, this season, Pacheco had only 23 yards. Kenneth Walker had 43 rushing yards. Bijan Robinson, 33 rushing yards. A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones combined for 29 rushing yards. Hubbard and Sanders last week only combined for 67 rushing yards. Rachaad White's going to be in a little bit of trouble. Moving on to our number 31, we have Miles Sanders. Speaking of being in trouble, Miles Sanders in this rushing attack is not relevant. And the primary reason for that is because they've been in negative game scripts. The rookie quarterback is making a boatload of mistakes, and because of that being the case, they can't run the ball in the second half. I don't want to hear anything about Chuba Hubbard being the next starting running back of this team, because he's not. Chuba Hubbard is running the ball in the 4th quarter. He is not a running back that is going to impede on the overall upside of Sanders going forward, but I don't trust the matchup against the Miami Dolphins. It's going to be a boat race, and with that being the case, the likelihood is Miles Sanders probably doesn't see himself a lot of fantasy upside within the given week. Moving on to our number 32, we have Tyjae Spears. Like I mentioned earlier, he has been a top 33 running back in 3 out of the last 4 games. That is why I have him at number 32, because he has been relevant. He has gotten himself a high volume of touches, and especially against a difficult matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, that may mean more receiving upside for Tyjae Spears in the given week. Number 33 is Jeff Wilson Jr. Under the assumption that he clears the overall injured reserve designation of returning within the 21-day window, and he's active for the given game against the Carolina Panthers, the second best matchup at the position, he's not going to see himself a huge workload of opportunity. We may even see more utilization out of Salvin Ahmed, but we're not going to, potentially know that until we get to Sunday. But for right now, Jeff Wilson Jr., if he's active and ready and practices by Friday, should be a solid play. Moving on to Samaje Perine. Again, this is under the assumption that Javonte Williams doesn't play. Samaje Perine has led all the running backs within this offense in terms of overall snap counts, continues to get himself a lot of receiving work. 4 catches on 5 targets for 73 rushing yards is no joke. And as long as he continues to maintain a huge receiving role within this offense in a negative game script, should be a solid top 36 option. Moving on to number 35, we have Tyler Allgeier. Again, Tyler Allgeier had 17 rushing attempts this last week. That is an egregiously high number, especially considering his inefficiency of only getting himself a 2.35 yard per carry average. Tyler Allgeier is a difficult running back to start, but he does get opportunity. He is in a decently advantageous matchup taking on the Washington Commanders, and they are at home, so that means that Desmond Ridder is going to lead them to victory, and hopefully Tyler Allgeier finds the end zone. Our last option is Gus Edwards. I don't like any of these Baltimore Ravens running backs. It's very difficult to predict the outcomes of how they want to utilize them, but Gus Edwards is the guy that leads the running backs in terms of running back rushing attempts, and hopefully he can fall into the end zone within the given week. That covers it for me today. Thank you everybody for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to go ahead, subscribe to the channel, click the like button, comment down below what you guys think about the rankings. Are there any adjustments? Are there any players you have questions regarding in regards to potentially a different scoring format, all that kind of jazz? I'll be sure to potentially help out. Thank you everybody for watching. Until next time, the wide receiver position tomorrow, top probably 45, top 40. I don't know. We'll see. Until then, guys, thank you everybody, and I'll see you. Peace.